think something new under the sun. You can't take back them things you already done. No. You blame things that you do on somebody else. No. But they all see is you need help. But still you try so hard to cover up your games. You try so hard, hoping that one day something gon' change. You waste all of your time covering up your tracks. Spend all your days running away. You gotta watch your back, and that's the facts. You spend so much of your life scheming and trying to get over. Got you wondering why you come around. All you get is cold shoulder. Yeah, you try so hard to cover up your games. You try so hard, hoping that one day something gon' change. You try so hard. Yeah. You try so hard. You try so hard. Yeah. You try so hard. Give me, Can't run away forever. You gon' pay. Still you try so hard to cover up your games. Got you thinking don't nobody see all this time. Ooh, it ain't nothing changed.
Got the feeling in your bones, make you feel right at home. Honey, does it well, keep me dancing till I'm dead. 'Cause I could run a mile like this, head over heels, feels like this. The sun has got me on my track, I ain't never looking back. I ain't looking back. I ain't looking back. I ain't looking back. I ain't looking back. Yeah. Deep inside the depths of stone, voice will echo, need no phone. Ruled by the laws above, nature shows me, makes me taught. I could climb this mountain now, rise above the clouds and see. Well, oh, the falls have kept me strong. Never did I mean no wrong. 'Cause I
Please take your seats. The program will begin in 10 minutes. Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes.
Be blinded by the lights. We came to shine here. Watch it look daytime in the night. We bring the vibes here. We full of life, you keep the change. Keep the change. They hate and say we went and changed. I say the same. You must be blinded by the lights. You must be blinded by the lights. Lights. Yeah, 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 yeah. Now we high, high, high. Kaleidoscope of colors beaming from our eyes. Would've thought was LSD, LSD. Can't lose my mind like Kennedy, Kennedy. You see us cooking recipes, recipes. You hit the top, all you left with is the memories. Yeah, 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 yeah. Some faith, then who gon' hurt this? I naughty night, you lullaby. I'm doing me, it's do or die. You must be blinded by the lights. We came to shine here. Watch it look daytime in the night. We bring the vibes here. We full of life, you keep the change. Keep the change. They hate and say we went and changed. I stay the same. You must be blinded by the lights. You must be blinded by the lights, lights.
Please take your seats. The program is about to begin.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third annual convening of Bloomberg Green at COP. To our global audience of business leaders, investors, grassroots organizers, policymakers, and more, thank you all for joining us. Every year, the UN brings the world together, both to take stock of the climate crisis and to take action. As COP28 continues this week, we all know what's at stake. The harms from climate change grow worse by the day, but the opportunities for investment and economic returns are growing too. Moving to a cleaner, greener economy as fast as possible is going to take every level of society working together like never before. For every organization, the most effective climate actions start with accurate data and information. So as more goals get set and more agreements get negotiated in Dubai, the team at Bloomberg Green will provide the latest reporting and analysis with special guests who are accelerating ambitious climate plans around the world. Throughout the year, everyone can find Bloomberg Green's data-driven coverage on the terminal at Bloomberg.com. For now, thanks for tuning in and enjoy the program live from Dubai.
Please welcome to the stage Meg Szabo, head of Bloomberg Green and Sustainability Events.
Hello, and welcome to Bloomberg Green at COP28. We are thrilled to welcome you here to the Bloomberg Climate Hub in Dubai. As our founder, Mike Bloomberg, just said, Bloomberg Green is covering the climate crisis from every angle, especially here at COP, providing around-the-clock coverage, twice daily briefings, podcasts, live TV, analysis, and interviews. All this because we believe it's essential to create and highlight climate solutions. Over the next 2 days, you'll be hearing from those at the forefront of climate action. But before we get started, a couple of quick announcements. First, I would like to acknowledge our presenting sponsors, the Climate Pledge, First Abu Dhabi Bank, Indiana Economic Development Corporation, McKinsey Sustainability, Mubadala Investment Company, Red Sea Global, and Standard Chartered. And our supporting sponsors, General Motors and Google. We would also love to hear from you throughout the day. The Wi-Fi details can be found on the back of your badge. And you can also submit questions using the hashtag, you can also submit questions and respond to polls by scanning the QR code behind me. We also have translation devices available in the back of the room if you need them. And then you can also engage with us on social media using the hashtag BloombergGreen. And with that, let's get started. Please, we will begin with a look at climate finance.
Please welcome to the stage Shamara Wickramanayake, Managing Director and CEO of Macquarie Group, and Bill Winters, Group Chief Executive of Standard Chartered plc, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Francine Lacroix.
Excited to have you all here, and I have a stellar panel, so thank you so much for joining us. Another acronym, JETPs. But how many acronyms have you seen around? I don't know if it's like 50 or 100. What's your favorite one, Bill?
My favorite one?
Your favorite acronym?
I've invented one. It's a Sustainable High-Intensity Transition System.
Did you figure that out? Shamar, I mean, so many acronyms, and I know we're getting stuff. Do you have a favorite acronym?
Yeah, mine is TLA, which is three-letter acronym. Acronym for all acronym. I also quite
the Uber acronym.
Yeah, that's right. Not quite as good as your one though.
Yeah, yours really rolls off the tongue.
Yeah.
Bill, when you look at
I hope not.
everything we've achieved so far, we're like day 4 out of 2 weeks. Are you confident that this will actually make a meaningful difference for finance, for just getting to a greener planet?
Yeah, I'm definitely confident it will make a difference. I'd say there are a few encouraging things. I think the methane proclamation is extremely important because it shows that industry broadly is prepared to make a commitment to address something that is imminently addressable, but that had not yet been addressed. I think it's obviously a lot more than a gesture, but the $30 billion gesture that the UAE has made to provide some catalytic capital, or at least partially catalytic capital, alongside the MDBs is good. I think the level of discussion around what MDB reform could look like and how that could be translated through to real results is encouraging. A lot of the work that's been done, discussions that have been had around making the voluntary and the compliance carbon markets both more interoperable, but also more building underlying confidence. This is all good stuff, but this is foundation stuff. None of it is fundamentally problem solving. So encouraged that this can make a difference, but we're far from done.
Shamara?
And look, I find these COP sessions mostly really useful for the bilateral sessions we get to have here because it convenes a whole lot of people who are involved in driving these solutions. So the broader framework things we do are super, super important to create the enabling framework, but it's ultimately getting, for us in financial services, who mostly are causing emissions through Scope 3, to get to interact with people in the real economy in areas like energy, cement, steel, aluminium, and talk about tangible things we can get done. So, and we were discussing outside, Francine, that the COP in Glasgow was the first time we financial services people really came together in force and created teams to look at this. And we've had 3 COPs since where we come together and think about what we can get done. But ultimately, we're just enablers of stuff happening. And, I was saying to you, I had this joke about how many financial services people does it take to change a light bulb, and it's 1,000 to turn the room and 1 to hold the light bulb, because without the people with their hand on the light bulb, which is the people in the real economy, sorry, Bill, but it's getting late in the program, so we're just having all these conversations going round and round, and our financial services peers are awesome. So no offense to all of us, I'm one of them, but really unless we work with the people who are really having impact. And that's what I find useful in these COPs is it's literally 10 meetings a day. My colleague and I counted on the phone, we did 14,000 steps. Yes, Bill has his own venue, so people don't have to, he doesn't have to run to them because he can't do any steps. And I was thinking, well, sorry, we're just cheapskates that don't have a place and we just run to everyone's thing. But it's fantastic getting to do the meetings, and everything feels like it moves the dial when we talk with these people.
You can hang out with us, Shamara.
I know. Can I rent some of your?
I'm sure Bill's done also 8 kilometers, but he just doesn't want to say because it's
He's probably got so much space he wouldn't notice if I went and camped in a little corner one time, right? Next year.
Bill, when you look at private capital and private financing, this is like mobilizing it, scaling it, using it. If you look at those 3 things, where's it harder to either find the money or use it?
Right now, it's use it, because I think the underlying standards that we're all like shooting for, that will make it clear what's a good project, I think is still being scoped out. But look, we've had, as a bank, we set the objective of mobilizing $300 billion of capital over 10 years. We're well on the way to achieving that. We're almost at 100. And not to be too mercantilist about it, but we also targeted earning income of $1 billion over 3 years, and we're at $700 million after 2 years, so well on track. What does that mean? It means that there's a ton of underlying activity, but getting and this is all without a functioning carbon market, which I think is actually a necessary ingredient for the next step. When I say it's not functioning, it's very small relative to what it needs to be. And we probably don't have time to talk about it, but we know we can establish an underlying set of confidence in the standards that are being set by the Integrity Council and others, and then layer that on top of the existing sustainable finance work that happens and make huge strides in terms of mobilizing capital. But we've got to get these pieces together.
Shamara?
Yeah, I mean, I agree as well. There's a huge amount of money there, but what we have to do is create investable projects. So, that money is the money of pensioners and savers around the world, where the people who are entrusted with it, the custodians, have a duty to deliver good return for the risk. So they can't just write checks. We have to create investable projects where we de-risk things, and that does involve government setting frameworks. It involves MDBs and others, philanthropies doing first loss investment, etc., or guarantees, but it involves us coming up with domestic operators and financiers and our own skills projects where we can drive social outcome but also financial outcome, and not just for the investors but the communities we're investing in, because I mean, as an example, if you look at Southeast Asia, they have a lot of new build coal that is firmed baseload energy that is super important to lift the living standards of the people in their communities, and if we want them to move away from that, we have to create solutions that can drive the economic outcomes as well as the social. So that is where the challenge is, and sadly early on we're just having to go country by country, sector by sector, create solutions that can be scaled. But that to me feels like they're both hard work, that bringing the finding capital, but also the projects.
But Shamara, when you look at some of the projects, so what's the biggest barrier to entry, or barrier? Is it regulation? Is it that we haven't really quite figured out how green some of these projects are, or does it just take time?
It's the pathways are different for every country, and so it's tailoring solutions, and you have to go in the trenches and do this. And we've experienced this as we've built infrastructure for all these different parts of the world, that it requires just detailed focus on coming up with, there are a whole lot of countries in the world where renewable is the cheapest source of energy. Brazil, Paraguay, Kenya, DRC, Nepal, those places it's easier to get these going because they're economic. I call them, the default choice of rational actors. But as I said, in Southeast Asia, it's challenging. India has a different pathway, so and no one of us can get this done alone, but that I think is the issue, is tailoring it to drive the outcomes, and there just isn't a magic bullet.
Yeah. Bill, where do you see, again, some of these projects, are they concentrated in certain countries?
There's some project types that are extremely well established. Renewable power that's economic in its own right is pretty straightforward in most countries with a reasonable jurisdiction. But when we look at often some of the larger but also more complicated projects that get stuck in terms of connection through to, say, Shamara's asset management pools, for example, or these huge pools of ESG money that's been set aside that isn't highly specialized in taking political risk, in taking local FX risk, in taking project level risk at the development stage of a project. In other markets, there's been quite a refined system of in some cases, some public sector catalytic type support, and others, very specialized private sector, often coming out of banking, not always, support, or insurance companies that have been set up to sort of parcel out this risk and get complicated projects done. And in a lot of the sustainable infrastructure space, especially given the pace of development, it's not fully bedded down yet, which is why I think you hear so much about blended finance and about the roles that MDBs can play in providing often a relatively small amount of linchpin capital that can unlock a transaction. And which is why, when I listen to here on this stage, people like Ajay Banga, there's nobody more committed to getting this right and making the World Bank a super World Bank group, an extremely effective contributor. But he's got real constraints in terms of what he can do within his own charter. So he's got the World Bank have their set of activities. The Asia Development Bank has done some fabulously progressive things, et cetera, et cetera. We just need to get that together, perhaps together with the BlackRock, Brookfield, UAE managed money, and perhaps that gets replicated 10 or 12 times in different formats to provide that linchpin capital that's preventing the market from fully realizing its potential.
So is there enough collaboration between the groups?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And, Bill was mentioning Ajay Banga. We're part of the private sector investment lab that he's put together for the World Bank, where, good on him, he's given us a deadline of April next year to solve the problems of the world. But he's doing awesome work in terms of unlocking all this MDB capital, because there are all sorts of bottlenecks to getting it to flow. And so he's looking at how we can get guarantees done in a more standardized way, things like FX protection, as you're talking about securitizations, etc. And the solutions he's coming up with are super practical. He's also got to drive the culture of the organizations to deliver it. But equally then, we from the bottom up have to partner with these organizations to get the money flowing. And Bill was just saying, which is right, that solar, offshore wind, onshore wind, they're pretty much the cheapest forms of new build renewable, and a lot of the power that's been added this year has been, I think 60% of it has been solar, because it's, you know, the default choice of the rational actor. And even in the emerging economies, we're putting on a gigawatt of solar a day around the world, but it's intermittent. So there are things we need to do, like firming, which is batteries, hydrogen, etc., maybe nuclear in some jurisdictions. Transport in heavy vehicles requires work, agriculture requires work, transport, shipping. I was just briefly going to mention a few projects we're doing around the world, just to give examples of, you know, how we're trying to create these solutions in emerging economies. One of them is up in Mexico. We're doing something called Pacifico methanol, which is, we're basically trying to build industries in Mexico for blue methanol and e-methanol. What's happened there is the IFC has come in and put in a massive amount of debt and equity capital to get this project going. But happily, the developed countries are requiring shipping to switch from LNG to methanol, and they need sources for methanol, and Mexico turns out to be a great place to do it. We are providing the feedstock and the offtake to sell to the shippers, but that's a great example, but it's one example. So to scale the methanol industry in Mexico will take work, but we're trying to get that done. Equally in India, I've mentioned before, 2- and 3-wheelers are switching quickly to electrification. The heavy vehicles are struggling because the upfront capital cost is too high for the operators. So we in the Green Climate Fund are putting a lease facility in place where we'll put the equity in, a couple of $100 million each, and then leverage up $1.5 billion of debt. We're hoping once we get that first lease facility going and the market sees that they can actually economically do this and people can pay back, that will grow. Equally in places like Brazil, as I said, hydro is cheap, so Norsk Hydro is looking to source all its power from renewable. It has partnered with us in Brazil, a business called Hydro Rain, to provide wind power to their aluminium operations. So, you know, it's, and sorry to go into detail, but I think that's sadly what we feel it's taking, is we're having to go country by country where we have expertise, others can cover other countries, and get these pilot projects done so we can scale, but partner with the MDBs. And I think the top-down work is also super important. You know, we're really honoured to be participating in that, because it's quite encouraging, isn't it?
And so, for example, there are like working groups of GFANs in Vietnam and Indonesia. Like, how do you learn from working groups like that? And then can you replicate it elsewhere, or because countries are so different, it's difficult?
The GFAN's involvement, I know that the title of the session is Jet Peace. You know, those working groups are very focused on executing this high-level agreement that was reached over the past couple of years. In the case of Indonesia, a year and a half ago, although the concrete discussions began a year before that, to take a new idea, which is a new form of public-private partnership. And in that case, you know, at a high level, there was, you know, $10 billion coming from some wealthy countries, $10 billion coming from the private sector, you know, including our banks. That were going to then catalyze a multiple of that in terms of climate-related investment, including, very importantly in Indonesia, the decommissioning of coal-fired power plants. So, you know, it's this idea that you've got, as Shimara said, these are young populations in Southeast Asia with young power grids, young infrastructure. So the remaining life, the average remaining life of coal-fired power plants in Indonesia is like 35 years. So. And we just do the math and look at the global carbon budget. If we don't, number one, don't protect the existing carbon sinks, rainforests for starters, then we're going to have a really hard time living within the carbon budget. Number two, we've got to decommission coal. We can't just let it run its natural life. We just don't have enough in the budget to allow that to happen. Now, to go to an Indonesian and say, we'd like you to reduce the remaining life of your coal-fired power plant by 2/3. And replace that with what will be more expensive renewable power, because obviously they've already built the plant and they have the coal and they've got offtake agreements. Well, they're not going to do that, and it would be it's extremely expensive. Somebody has to pay them to do that. Okay, well, the idea is they'll issue carbon credits or transition credits, as they will be called, to the market, that perhaps led by some governments, to take those those offsets and use that effectively to fund the investment in renewables and to compensate for the loss of life of these plants. It's a great idea. Getting into the detail is really, really challenging. I know we had hosted almost a celebration of the progress that we made after a year, a little bit too soon, in fact, way too soon to celebrate, but it was a less formal session with the Indonesians at the Indonesian Pavilion 2 nights ago. And then yesterday morning, followed up with the same group. And this was the Deputy Secretary from the US, from Japan, from Indonesia. Now, the important group for breaking the back of this problem. We got into the sort of the cut and thrust of the negotiations yesterday morning at 7:30 across the way here. And you realized just how detailed and difficult this is. Some of the really thorny issues that we have to get through. Is it going to work?
Because there are loopholes, or because it's just difficult to get your head around?
Because it's new, and
and every generator had a different issue and pathway they needed, right? It was because our teams were at that as well.
It's new, and it's a set of actions that are happening 15, 20 years from now that have to be codified and paid for today, and that makes people nervous.
So it does need 100 people in finance in the room to move the room around.
Well, it needs people in the real economy as well. We need the generators at the table, we need the regulators at the table, but it takes a lot to get it to happen, I think. And I do think, we, to use another, not a 3-letter acronym, a 4-letter acronym, but we started with these Climate Finance Leadership Initiative country platforms under Bloomberg a few years ago, and India was the first one. We're doing Colombia now. That was a bottom-up one where we got a whole lot of Indian corporates together and Indian banks together with international, and we identified sectors where change was needed, and we asked everyone to put forward projects. So there were 9 of them that we've been working on now, which included our heavy vehicle leasing facility. Tata did some in e-mobility. We're doing some in wastewater sanitisation, green hydrogen. That's now got momentum, and we're probably at the point where we can say now to the 9 projects, get going and then scale from there. The JETPs, we're taking a different approach, which is coming more top-down and having the developed country and private international players give commitment of finance, subject to the governments locally producing a report on where they want to grow. And so Vietnam and Indonesia, we've now got those 300-page reports, but the detail in the reports to try and thread the needle between what the country needs. And even on what Bill was just talking about with coal-fired generators, we need analytics and data to show what you will save in emissions if you shut this thing early and what it will cost. So we can price the credits, and the credits are reliable, and then trade in them. And we need to create a market. In Mark Carney and Bill and I were talking about this yesterday morning before yesterday's panel. Losing sight of you again, what panel we're on and what we're speaking about. But basically, we were trying to discuss how we create the market for these credits in the private market. And all of it requires a lot of work. And so the JETPs are a GFANS initiative, and Mark Carney, Mary Shapiro doing an awesome job there, setting us all up to get the work done. But long way to go.
Shamara, is also data takes time.
Yeah.
Right, if you're going to, first of all, gather it and collect it. And so, again, does it take longer than we thought it would when you set up, when you were part of GFANS?
Probably for me. I don't know, Bill, what do you think?
I mean, data is a real problem, especially in the developing economies. And it's not just that it's not always available, it's that it's oftentimes fundamentally differently formatted. And it's a key ingredient to all the transition pathway work that we're doing, is to start with a baseline that's agreed, then agree a pathway, then agree what the appropriate and necessary investments are to stay alive on that pathway, and then to use carbon markets to offset these difficult to abate or unabatable emissions. But it all starts with data. And while the data is reasonably clear coming out of some of the most developed economies, it's very unclear coming out of the developing economies. And that obviously, apart from making the job more difficult, undermines confidence that some of the solutions we're coming up with are completely legit. So that's a big area of focus for us. And it's a big area of focus for GFANS.
So we started also talking about, capital being available. And is it really going to the right places, or is it chasing, I guess, the cool new energy projects without thinking too much about the infrastructure?
No, I think it's going to the safe places. This money, as I said, is the savings of pensioners and retirees and nations. And so they ideally want defensive, capital protected, long duration yielding assets to invest in. We jokingly say it's everything from the deadly boring right through to the barely interesting. So the stuff that's more challenging, there isn't that much money for at all. No. That's the smaller space, and that's why we've got to try and de-risk that stuff and bring it back. But the early investments, this is where the catalysing MDB money and government money can come in, or venture or philanthropy. So there's plenty of capital for the stuff that's easy to do. There's not as much for the stuff that's hard to do, and that's why at the beginning I said the investable projects, I think, is where the challenge is.
Maybe the biggest financing gap, not in dollars, but in terms of percentage available, is for adaptation. So, yeah. I mean, we're all talking 1.5 degrees. It's entirely likely that we exceed 1.5 degrees, and even at 1.5 degrees, we're going to have horrific climate effects, and we're already obviously seeing the early stages. Most of the poorest nations in the world, many of which are coastal, have absolutely no defenses at all. And a lot of the work that we've done at Standard Chartered has made very clear that a very small amount of capital today, relatively, can avoid 12 to or more times the cost, not in 20 or 30 years, but in 7 years. Right? So by 2030, if we don't spend, and there's 9 key markets that we looked at, if we don't spend something as small as $10 billion today, we're going to be paying $150 billion in adaptation-related expense. And this is, from an NPV perspective for society, it's a no-brainer. Right. But these projects tend not to be easily economic because you're protecting against a bad event. So money isn't going to flow into them. Profit-seeking money won't flow there. And there's not enough philanthropic money or government money to fix that. So I think there's a lot of gaps. I would call that one out as a top-line gap.
But it's also, I mean, there's projects we could do, like you look at Florida, if sea levels are rising, it makes sense to create a mechanism where the residential and commercial and industrial pay a tiny levy over time, and that's used to fund the big amount of capital to build seawalls and flood defences, and you take it to Bangladesh. But it's so much work to get each of these done, and we only have that much capacity. You've got a big office at the Blue Zone, but basically it's not enough to get this done, fast. So we've got to prioritise and collaborate on where we think we can move the needle the fastest, soonest.
Bill, you also mentioned carbon markets. So what's the template, like the ideal template for carbon markets that would support you in these efforts?
To me, the carbon markets it's an ecosystem that needs to come in place. All the pieces are there. We need to tighten it up. It starts with data that we talked about. Then it's science-based transition pathways. SBTI has taken on a lot of that. It's going very painfully slowly from my perspective, so there are other science-based pathway generators that we're using that will be clear for each industry. This is a good pathway. Third is somehow getting credibility for corporations around the world to say, this is what you need to do to say that you're net zero. You need to be on this pathway. You can use carbon credits, but for the following things, and this is the quality of carbon credit that you need to buy. An organization called VCMI is making good progress in that regard, not fully there. And then you have to have carbon markets themselves where there's confidence that these aren't bad projects, it's not greenwashing. And that's the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, which has been set up as an independent board, science-based. They're at a very granular level of methodology formation today for starting mostly with nature-based contracts, but eventually you'd love to get into the jet Ps and the coal decommissioning and other things like that. And once that whole system is in place, and the stakeholders, whether those are shareholders or governments or your customers or your own employees, say, okay, I expect you to be net zero. The data's in place, you can use carbon contract, you know what the transition pathways are, get going. Then I think it happens very, very quickly. And I think we'll get an enormous scaling that we've not seen so far. But as long as there's one piece that's loose in there, it gives people who don't really want to do the right thing an opportunity to kind of squirrel away. So I'm quite optimistic. I feel like we're close, but we're definitely not yet there.
Shamara?
Yeah, in terms of data, I basically endorse everything that Bill's saying there. I guess the only thing I'd add is, ideally, if we can not make it a trade-off to drive the climate outcomes and the economic ones, then people will move without needing sticks. I prefer the carrot approach. And that's what we're trying to do is, as I say, make it the default choice of rational actors to do these things.
Well, thank you so much for a good conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Francine.
Please welcome to the stage Lei Zhang, founder and CEO of Envision, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Sharon Chen.
Hi, it's so good to have you with us, Lei, today. I just wanted to start by talking about this goal that everyone is talking about here at COP28 about tripling renewables globally. You know, there's so much talk and promises and pledges, but you are someone who's actually working on the ground to deploy renewables all over the world on 6 continents. I mean, what do you think is the one thing that's the most misunderstood about this ambition?
Right. So, always good to coming to COP. I do believe COP is kind of reality checkpoints. Also give us a reflection for next year, at least. Now we know what's happening now. So overall, we are off the track. And particularly in the hard-to-abate segment. We see the shipping, iron, green steel, cement. So this bulk of the segment is actually linked to one thing, is green molecules. Now you need a green hydrogen, green ammonia to decarbonize shipping or aviation fuel, and also the steel making. But today's challenge, I think really in the world transition, green molecule is going to play a more important role. So previously, we focused very much on the green electrons. So that's why wind and the solar storage developed very fast. We have good policy, feed-in tariff. We have a contract for difference, UK offshore policies, German renewable energy law, which is laying very good foundation for taking off the renewable electricity. But now, the real challenge is this hard-to-abate segment. The green molecules is going to be so important.
And what do you think needs to be done there? What was your wish list?
So I do see, during COP, people have lots of discussion about phasing down of fossil fuel, oil and gas companies. But something really important, I think, is to build constructively the policy to industrialize the green molecules. Think about, so even some oil ministers said, the world is out of Stone Age, not because we run out of stone. Again, if we are out of fossil fuel, it's just not because we're facing down the fossil fuel. It's just because we create the new iron, new bronze, so which is similar, is new molecules, new oil, should be industrialized. That's something is very critical. Today, if you see the policy around here, is too much debate. Okay, the bank say, okay, you don't have an offtake agreement, so we can give you the infrastructure project finance. And the company said, okay, I don't have scale. It's difficult for me to establish such a supply chain. And someone said, okay, we are the first mover for green ammonia, but the reality is, of green hydrogen, the offtake agreement, we're starting from 2026, 27. We are running for time. So that's why I think the real industrialist, the real action, and also the entrepreneurship is going to be very important to demonstrate the world. Okay, how can we make the green molecule cost competitive? And one day, I arrived yesterday. One day before, I was in Mongolia. So Envision net zero hydrogen park. We are commissioning the first phase of the 1.5 million ton green ammonia and hydrogen project, which is the largest in the world. We are commissioning today. We are able to shipping green ammonia even at similar cost as gray ammonia. So we designed the whole system from wind turbine to storage system to hydrogen electrolyzer to ammonia synthesis. We redefined the system. So take actions. We even didn't have any long-term offtake agreement, but we decided, okay, so we should take a supply-driven approach to change the dynamics.
I mean, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. So you've built the first net zero manufacturing facility as well in Mongolia, and that's a major focus for you to be going into this region. And the Chinese government as well. On Bloomberg Green, we did a story about how there's a major campaign underway to bring renewables to the deserts in China. I mean, what was the experience like on the ground, and how do you feel it is trying to advance this agenda in the world's biggest emitter?
Yeah, so I'm a fan of the remote area or desert area. So not only in Mongolia, I go to Morocco, go to Indonesia, all this area. I think about, from my point of view, for this energy transition, no matter developed country or developing country, we are all developing countries for this energy transitions. So, which is even a fantastic opportunity for developing countries. Why? So why is so difficult for them? Because normally there's too much sun, too much wind. It's difficult for people living there. But think about, this is so much energy, abundant renewable energy sources. It's about how can we turn these renewable energy sources into a fantastic integrate renewable energy production and renewable energy consumption approach in industrial park. That's something I do believe is going to be the most important way to decarbonize lots of segments. Think about today, why we all know wind and solar are cheaper than fossil fuel. We all know the world have plenty of renewable energy sources. Think about why we cannot just turn around overnight. Because people know to build a high voltage transmission grid take about 10 years. All the permissions, all kinds of things. But think about it, go to remote area, you don't even need a grid. We build our own renewable energy operating system. And you actually, this intermediate grid, actually you reduce significant part of cost. You don't have too much permissions. Nobody living there. And what do you need is actually put your industrial equipment, aluminum or hydrogen production facility, which now, because of digitalization and AI and all the advanced manufacturing equipment automations, which is not don't need too much people actually today, even can remotely do it. So this is going to be, my dream is for next 10 years to build 100 net zero industrial park in all the developing areas. So to really to become an important driver to decarbonization.
And I know, obviously, you're a strong advocate of getting out there and doing it and taking action on the ground, but a major conversation here at COP is financing. How do you finance these projects? And a lot of your projects now are in developed countries, but you're moving increasingly into developing countries. I mean, what do you think is the major barrier, and what do you think needs to be fixed to help?
Right, I think it's a good point. So this kind of multilateral kind of banks is very important for this developing country. Think about today, all these developing countries, they have abundant renewable sources, but they lack of the engineering talent. They lack of financial resources. So what I'm seeing the model is, so Envision, we are building the gigafactory in the UK, in France, all over the world, also other renewable infrastructures. So we are developing good relationship with the leading banks. And this technology company and also financial institution kind of combination because leverage their existing relationship and know-how, then go together rather than financial organization alone to this developing country, go together, so which could be building a good foundation over there. So for instance, so we are strategically collaborating with HSBC globally. So we are building gigafactory in the UK, building such a relationship which is going to make us a project in the Middle East or go to Indonesia. So this kind of technology and financing and combination, which is also enhanced the confidence for each other, because you do give them this technology visibility, cost curve, and also so give them the insight. Then financial organization, they are willing to take more calculated risks, which is also important.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of risk, so not only do you have to convince the investors, but you also have to convince local governments, local communities. I mean, what do you find is the most effective argument or effective approach when it comes to that?
Yeah, so far, the area I'm interested in is not a popular area, not a fancy place. So government would like to see me to go to the remote area. When I talked to Pedro Sanchez, I said, I'm going to Extremadura, which is southern of Spain. So we want to build a natural park for gigafactory. So of course, I think everyone likes that because it's a fantastic opportunity for the local economy, for local industrial systems. So that's why I think the renewable energy revolution, and starting with edge, starting with developing countries or developing regions, or starting with where the grid is not strong, existing, where the fossil fuel, oil, gas is not strong. And this place is indeed, they need this renewable sources, they need energy, and also they need industrialization. So it's rather than defending, rather than welcoming. So that's, I think, this constructive approach is also be very important to have this inclusive development. I do believe this energy transition is a fantastic opportunity for lots of developing nations to build their renewable energy system, also the green industrial revolution ecosystems as well.
So, I mean, I just wanted to take a bit of time to just talk about COP itself. This COP28, I know it's your second day here, it's your fourth COP. I mean, as someone who's working in renewables on the ground at this scale, and then seeing this kind of more, this diplomatic process of COP, I mean, how do you bridge that disconnect, or how do you what's your reaction to people who say, all this is happening in a bubble, and there's this disconnect between what's really happening on the ground?
Right, I think COP definitely is very important. If you look back to the last 20 years, what's the most important events or policy or activity, which is one of them is a Paris Agreement, which is happened during the COP. So people is able to eventually reach the consensus. So it's a consensus building place, also have the objective timelines. So this is good, actually I think a very positive part of COP. So again, we believe this kind of reality check, reflection taking, and especially on the objective, consensus, timeline agreement is going to be very useful and effective for the global industrialists.
And what are you yourself looking out for most from this meeting?
Actually, I don't care too much. I just take actions.
So, we just wanted, I thought we previously, before we came on, we also wanted to talk a little bit about where you are looking, where you see opportunities specifically around the world, and what are the projects that you are most excited about?
Yeah, as I said, so from the shifting from green electron to green molecule is so fundamental, it's so important. Think about electron is not a material. So it's a form of energy. But in case, in the future, we are not using gas, coal, oil. That's the material world we need. We cannot get carbon, because one thing we are using fossil fuel is get carbohydrate. carbon element and a hydrogen element in the carbohydrate. So you see lots of material here is carbohydrate. Once this fossil fuel is not going to be used, so that's where is carbon coming from for making our material world working? What is the the hydrogen coming from? So that's why this natural-based, this green molecules is going to play so important role. So this is not about only energy industry, also about the chemical, biological synthesis segment is going to have a fundamental shift. This is going to be tremendous. It's not only about the fuel, but also feedstocks.
Yeah, but what specifically is Envision doing to take advantage of that? And
yeah, so we have the the venture capital arm to particularly look at synthetic biology. We invest in company using DNA editing to modifying the microalgae to making them to taking CO2, convert, it's created as new photosynthesis. I think end of the day, think about today's all the fossil fuel is coming from photosynthesis. It's algae, which is 100 million years ago. They take solar energy and photosynthesis become carbohydrate, then so in the ground. So that's the energy today we are coming from. So we need to create a new photosynthesis process, which is much faster, much bigger, and much effective. So that's why tremendous renewable energy needed, but also tremendous industrial system needed to create such a new photosynthesis process.
And in Asia specifically, what are you doing to advance your goals?
Yeah, so we are actively in Indonesia, we are actively in Vietnam, we are actively in India. Basically, Envision is a truly global company. 60% of employees are global talents. So for Asia, I think the energy demand and also is huge, and the younger population, growth potential. So if we are able to solving this renewable energy supply, it's really become providing a strong growth engine for the local economy. So if you cannot fix well, it also could be another problem for the growth for this region.
Okay, I think we're coming to the end of our time.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Indiana is for the bold, and we're boldly embracing the energy transition. Top 5 clean energy in development. Indiana anchors the Midwest's $1 billion hydrogen hub. Over $33 billion in new investment from sustainable companies in agrovoltaics and wind farming, electric vehicles and batteries, clean energy. And we're partnering with Andretti Formula E to bring Indiana's all-electric race team to iconic cities across the globe. Indiana for the bold.
Please welcome to the stage Andrea Richter-Gary, Senior Vice President, Global Strategy and Engagement at Indiana Economic Development Corporation, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Amit Nayak.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining me today, Andrea.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amit. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, let's jump straight into it. Now, Indiana's background is in production and manufacturing. Can you talk about how you've come to be a hub for generating clean energy and technologies?
Most definitely. So Indiana, we're a state that grows things and we make things, and that's truly in our DNA. So when we look at how the state's economic development agency, my role, it is how we do that with an eye towards sustainability, but also knowing that we are the center of those heavy to abate and hard to abate industries, right? So on the generation side, what that looks like is a concerted effort to work with our utilities on generation. So we're actually the 4th in the country, from the US, for clean energy and development, right? So that we're going to have the needs and the clean energy needs to be able to continue that investment. You see up on the screen, we have recently received one of the designations by the US government for hydrogen hubs. So again, this is another way, not hypothetical, that we're bringing new energy sources, new fuels to these hard-to-abate industries to be able to make a meaningful impact. And it's even in the sectors we have. So we have 5 OEMs in the state of Indiana, traditional automotive manufacturing. But as we start to see that transition to electric mobility, we are starting to see how we take our workforce, how we take our battery ecosystem, and turn that into producing that next generation of EVs. And we've had some exciting announcements, whether it's Samsung SDI and Stellantis or GM, that this is all happening, and it's happening in real time.
So as we collectively work to build a green or greener economy, what gaps are we faced with? How is Indiana poised to help? And why are subnational and local voices important?
Well, that's a great question, and it's a really nice segue from what we were just hearing in the panel before that. So here at the backdrop of COP28, we have really lofty rhetoric. We have ambitious goals. We talked a lot about the tripling renewables. So how do we actually accomplish that, right? How do we build what that is? And if you look at Indiana, where actually 25% of the US steel is made in the state of Indiana. It's an economic engine, it's a driver. So what do you need to make, for solar? You need racking. What do you need to make electric vehicles? Steel and other metal components. For wind turbines, it's concrete, it's cement. It's these materials that are gonna really be the underpinnings of the energy transition, and it's not hypothetical. So Indiana, it's not prospective, right? We are poised to manufacture the energy transition, and we're poised to do it now. So when you ask what Indiana can do to kind of fill those gaps, I think it's a few things that we offer uniquely. One is speed to market. So again, we have the site readiness, we have the manufacturing workforce, technicians, the universities in our state who can offer those advanced degrees. Purdue University is actually the #1 degree granting programming for graduates who support EV, right? Rose-Hulman, the #1 in the US for undergraduate research universities in engineering. So again, you might not have heard of this, but these are all the components that when we have investors come to us, those are the things they need to develop and get those projects off the ground. So again, we lead right now in the #1 state for sustainable building materials, and we see a huge opportunity to have that leadership role in battery manufacturing as well as solar manufacturing.
Nice. Now, shifting the focus to sustainability, what role do sustainability and innovation play in an economic strategy like Indiana's?
I mean, it's crucial. It is the role, right? So when I talked a little bit about what that momentum could be for manufacturing the green economy, on the flip side of it is how do we do it cleaner and better and faster? So, part of that is really how we look at where the opportunities for decarbonization are. So one fact that I'll throw out there, there's a county called Lake County, Indiana. It's in the northern part of our state. And it actually has about 400 million tons per annum of carbon emissions. That's more than London. That's more than Berlin. But also, when you look at the state of Indiana, 1/3 of our GDP comes from steel manufacturing. So you have this tug of how do we move forward economic growth, but how do we focus on those industries that can have an outsized impact? And that's through carbon capture, right? That's through hydrogen. That's, we talked in the last panel about how important it is for demand and some of the offtake agreements. That's not hypothetical. We have the demand in our state, and those agreements are happening. We'll be bringing some of that first supplies of hydrogen in 2025, right? So it is there, and it is ready to make an impact. With carbon capture in the southern part of our state, we have a great company called Heidelberg Materials. And through kind of looking at their DOE feed studies, Department of Energy feed studies, and the geological makeup of Indiana, there's a huge potential for carbon capture technology to make a huge impact in that part of the state as well. So it's going to be that kind of company leadership as well as state leadership on the policy side. We just passed legislation to be more friendly towards carbon capture that's going to make an impact in these certain industries.
And how does Indiana support the sustainability efforts of the companies it tries to attract, both for expansion and coming to set up?
I mean, it's one of the most important factors, right? So when you see these large-scale announcements come to our state, whether it's in electric vehicles or semiconductors, the #1 need is clean energy generation, right? So it's having that mix of bringing more renewables online. It's now the hydrogen hub has been a huge investment, attraction tool. So it's how do we start to match those needs and be forward-looking to make sure that we have capacity to do that. And then again, it's the workforce. I can't stress that enough. The companies will need to have the skilled technicians as well as the degree programs that support this, right? So when you have a Purdue University that I mentioned earlier, or Indiana University that is in the audience today that's really leading the way and kind of high impact climate solutions in the state, or Notre Dame, it's that ecosystem that is really appealing to our companies to know that when they're there, they can see those projects in development and they can see success. The last thing I'd note on that, which, because you think about some of these traditional industries, it's the newer industries too. I loved seeing the announcement from Semi the other day about how to have more sustainable practices in semiconductors. It's a huge area of growth for our state. So again, how are we looking to some of our site readiness? We have a new LEAP Innovation District in our state that's kind of marrying this idea of sustainable sites, from the beginning with these critical industries that need to have that.
Now, before we wrap up, we've heard today about Indiana's legacy in heavy industry and advanced manufacturing. And we know you also have a global reputation for agriculture and motorsports. Can you share a few examples of how the state is innovating in these other traditional disciplines, which might not exactly be known for their sustainability practices?
No, I appreciate that. This is kind of one of the most fun things about my job is to share more about what Indiana is or what you may have heard about Indiana. So in agriculture, again, there's so many diverse examples of how we're coupling innovation with sustainability. So the idea of agrivoltaics, that's taken hold in the huge swaths of farmland that is now being used for solar generation. And no longer is it kind of the either or. It's either a solar field or it's farm field. I mean, I grew up on a farm in the Midwest, so I know how important it is to those communities. But the idea that you can raise your crops, but also raise the energy for your community is something that's really taking hold on kind of that local level. Or on the flip side, we talked a lot about carbon capture, one of the byproducts being ammonia. So that actually represented a huge opportunity in Indiana where the ammonia needed for fertilizers was actually a way that farmers were able to rely less on imported ammonia, but use some of that byproduct from heavy industry and bring that back into a more circular economy. So it's not one thing, it's a lot of different things that are happening in our state from our stakeholders, from our companies, from our local communities to do that. And now racing. I think, I won't do a survey of who's been here to Indiana before, but I think you probably have heard of the, thank you, the Indy 500. So, Amit, apologies for this, but it's where the rubber meets the road of sustainability and motorsports. And again, it's across the board. So we have some partners from, I think, Andretti Autosports and Formula E that you're going to hear more about at the dinner. So it's how do you even turn racing on its head that you're pushing the boundaries of technology in electric mobility, but also still in that human competition. I went to my first race in London this past July, and it was fantastic. I felt that same thrill, that same kind of excitement around the race. But even in traditional motorsports, so last May, we have a biannual event called the Indiana Global Economic Summit that brings together diplomats, industry leaders, and we have this kind of titans of motorsports with the Penskes, Firestone, and others, and they were talking about even the materials into racing are becoming more sustainable, whether it's the tires, the composites, that they're doing more with less, they're going faster with less. So it's super exciting to be there. We'll be having the Global Summit again next May. It's on the weekend of the Indy 500, so we hope to see you all there, but just really excited to kind of be here and playing this part and having this voice here at COP28.
That's a great way to end. Well, love the work you're doing, Andrea. Thank you for sharing your insights. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much.
Please welcome to the stage Akshat Rathi, senior reporter at Bloomberg Green.
Hello, everyone. You're all here at COP28, and you're going to hear a phrase if you haven't already heard it. Phasing out of unabated fossil fuels. It's something that is creating a lot of controversy. It is something that the science says we must do. But we can spend a lot of time talking about each of those words because precision matters when 200 countries are signing off on a document. Today, we're going to focus on one of those words, which is unabated. All it really stands for is if you're going to burn fossil fuels, if you have carbon capture technology attached to it, then you're allowed to use it. You're abating them. If you don't, that is unabated, and that's what people want to phase out. So what is carbon capture technology? It's quite basic. It's an umbrella set of technologies. It goes from all the way processes that only produce carbon dioxide, such as ethanol fermentation. It's 100% carbon dioxide with some water, to all the way actually drawing down carbon dioxide from the air. And the cost of capturing that carbon dioxide varies on that gradient. The more concentrated the source of carbon dioxide, the cheaper the technology. And the process is kind of the same for all of them. You need a little bit of tweak here and there, but it's at the heart a chemical process. It starts by taking that mixture of gases, putting it in a chemical stripper, which specifically pulls carbon dioxide out, and then compressing it into a liquid, putting it back down into an oil and gas field. It is something we know how to do. We've actually been doing it for more than 50 years. But for that period, its use hasn't been for climate purposes. Its use began as a way to enhance oil recovery, to increase the production of oil in depleted gas and oil wells. And that works because if you take carbon dioxide, it acts like soap in its liquid form deep underground, and it pushes out more oil. So in the 1970s, the oil and gas industry started using this technology. But of course, this technology does have climate use because there are certain processes that we just need to cut carbon dioxide from, even if we don't use fossil fuels. So the production of cement, for example, just the chemistry of cement produces carbon dioxide emissions. And you do need to capture those emissions and get rid of them if we don't want to keep warming the planet. So in the 90s, companies started using this technology for climate purposes, or in this case, to avoid taxes. So in 1990, Norway introduced a hefty carbon tax. Equinor, or at the time Statoil, was creating this plant, a natural gas plant, which had about 10% carbon dioxide in the mix as it was drawing the natural gas out. So to avoid the carbon tax, it instead built a carbon capture plant and then just buried the carbon dioxide deep underground, and thus avoided the carbon tax, so it could pay for the technology. In the recent decades, there have been a couple of waves of interest in carbon capture. As you can see on this slide, there have been, on the blue side, a lot of announced projects in the first decade in 2010s, and of course, in the second decade. We're going to talk through the first decade, and then we'll come back to the second decade. One of the reasons why we have a resurgence in interest is because of climate change and because of the urgency of acting on it. But the first wave was much more tied to incentives being created by government. The one place where those incentives were the greatest was the US. The US currently has the most number of carbon capture plants in the world, both for fossil fuel extraction and for simply burying carbon dioxide for climate purposes. It's also the place which has given the most incentive in the form of tax credits. And they varied over the years. In the early part, they started as little as $15 per ton of CO2. Now you can get as much as $150 a ton, depending on which type of carbon capture you do. The reason there was a wane in interest was twofold. One, much of carbon capture in the early part was still attached to fossil fuel extraction. So because these companies couldn't justify the cost of carbon capture on its own, they needed to figure out a way to have an additional revenue attached to it, which was to draw more oil or more gas. And that has been a problem for the industry. Because Oil and gas prices are volatile. We've seen a rapid increase in recent years, but of course, during the pandemic, we saw a rapid decline. And that meant that the total amount of carbon capture, the black there, hasn't really increased all that much. But to be on track for net zero, according to the International Energy Agency, you need 30 times as much carbon capture in the next 7 years. So why have there been problems scaling this technology? Well, we're going to talk through 3 case studies. This is a project in Australia built by Chevron. It was supposed to be built on a natural gas facility where, again, the natural gas field had some CO2 attached to it. The Australian government said, Chevron, you can build this project, but only if you will also capture about 80% of the emissions that come from it. Chevron said, yes, we'll do that. The plant was built for $2 billion, the carbon capture plant. It was supposed to capture 4 million tons every year. The best it has done ever has been 2.7 million tons. The most recent figures are 1.6 million tons. There have been a number of technology problems, some which are quite dumb, such as just using the wrong kind of steel in the pipe, and that caused the process to not work properly. In other cases, the technology works perfectly fine. Again, we know how to do this. This is a project in the US, in Texas. It's a plant, a carbon capture plant attached to a coal power plant. It takes the CO2 and then sends it off to an oil field. It was built for about $1 billion. It captures about 1.4 million tons. It was built on time, on budget. It got some government grant, but most of its revenue were coming from being able to extract oil. Now, in 2020, oil prices went negative, and Petronova had no economic incentive to continue. So it stopped operating, and now oil prices are back up high, and it began operation earlier this year again. Another example is one that me and my colleagues here at Bloomberg Green wrote an investigative story looking at, is the Occidental plant in the US. This is the world's largest carbon capture plant by capacity. Doesn't look like much because it's a satellite image, but it can capture 8.4 million tons. It was built on time, the technology worked, but its economics were attached to extracting natural gas. And when it was built in 2010, immediately after that, natural gas prices cratered. And so this plant never really ran for more than a third of its capacity, and in the last 3 years, really just ran for 10% of its capacity. And because point source carbon capture, or capturing from smokestacks, has been hard, and that's been one of the many problems why we continue to put out record amount of greenhouse gases, we are now being forced to consider the more expensive option of actually not just scaling the technology at smokestacks, but also drawing carbon dioxide from the air. So Occidental Petroleum, again, the same company, is also investing in direct air capture. This is where you simply take air and you pass it through these chemicals and capture the CO2. But for the same price tag of an 8.4 million ton project, this one is only able to capture 500,000 ton because it's a new technology, and the energy required to capture CO2 from a diluted stream of gas is enormous, and so it just is much more expensive to run the process. Now, to talk a little more about the details around carbon capture, the policies, the many steps that we need to get through to actually scale this technology to make a meaningful difference to act on climate change, I'd like to invite my panel of experts. Brad, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Now, let's start with the US and why the US has been the place that has deployed this technology the most.
Well, so I think your intro captured it well in terms of there's this fortuitous synergy between, back in the 1970s, the oil and gas industry had been producing in certain fields for decades, and their conventional strategies for recovering oil had run their course, and they experimented with CO2 essentially acting as a solvent. So they basically excelled over time at large-scale capture, transport, and geologic injection of CO2, admittedly for other purposes. But through that process, what they discovered is that at the same time you're producing that oil, you're accomplishing secure geologic storage. So it's a form of geologic storage, it's just you have hydrocarbon production associated with it. And of course, as climate policy evolved, then the perspective on what could be done with geologic storage evolved as well. You mentioned Norway. This is a great example. I think the thing that I would note in addition to your summary is that, contrary to widespread public perception, until 2018, there was little or no policy support for carbon capture and storage in the United States or almost anywhere else in the world. And that's not how it's seen. There's this perception that tens of billions of dollars have been invested in the technology. It's just not true. The first real shot of investment in the United States was in the 2008. We had the financial crisis, and then we had our federal stimulus, economic recovery legislation. There was about $3 billion invested in projects then. Several of our large-scale commercial demonstrations that are operating today came from those dollars. But the corresponding investment in renewables was over 10 times that. But the critical difference, which is not recognized, is that the carbon capture did not have a functioning tax credit at the time. There was a tax credit in law, but it didn't work. And I don't have time to get into why, but it just didn't function to drive investment. So,
well, but there was the first wave of interest that we saw on the slide. There were a number of projects that were announced during that first decade after the financial crisis, and the 45Q tax credit at least was introduced even if the rules weren't agreed on. And so you're saying they didn't get built because the tax credit rules weren't
right.
clarified.
So actually, even the example you cited, Petronova, the power plant near Houston, which, as you rightly pointed out, on time, on budget, worked very well, did not take the tax credit.
Yes, but
because
it
wasn't
got
yet
a
available.
Department of Energy grant for about
right. But going forward now, we have a policy framework that is arguably the most robust in the world, and it has two parts to it. There's the tax credit component. Our 45Q tax credit is if you capture and store CO2 in a saline geologic formation with no oil production, you get $85 a ton. And for direct air capture, capturing CO2 from ambient air, it's $180 per ton. The federal investments, the other piece of this then is we have our national infrastructure legislation, which passed 2 years ago. And within that legislation, there's $12 billion dedicated over 5 years explicitly to carbon management. So carbon capture at point sources, carbon dioxide removal, and CO2 transport and storage. And so those demonstration dollars are available to projects, and they will also be able to claim the tax credit, which is exactly what the renewables projects had in the late 2000s.
Yep.
That's how in the United States we commercialized utility scale solar projects, was a combination of federal dollars and tax credits, and until now that wasn't available to carbon capture.
The missing part in that is a lot of those solar and wind projects were also built by private investors. Now, Neil, you've looked at carbon capture for a few years now as an opportunity to invest in. Have you invested in it?
We have, well, first, actually, I want to thank you, because when you and I first met, actually by coincidence in UAE, I think it was 2017, 2018, I think I made some offhanded comment about, serious investors don't look at carbon capture, and you taught me, you gave me some of your articles, and taught me to look, and so thank you personally, not just for that, but for your excellent reporting on this. We are investing, small scale, within portfolio companies at first. I'm happy to give some of those examples. I think it's important, though, to just take a step back and just remind people about the scale of the energy transition and the capital required, right? I mean, we're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar need every single year across the climate space, of which the energy transition is the biggest. And of course, carbon capture is really fundamentally also about the industrial decarbonization and transition. And what we see is that there's a real lack of capital available for an important piece of it that I think people forget, which is this transition is incredibly CapEx intensive. You have to do very large investments to decarbonize at scale. And this is where carbon capture and a number of other technologies come in, where you're talking about investments of several hundred million, even over $1 billion in equity per project. Right? And as we look at capital formation today, there's a lot of work being done very early stage in the venture space, taking true technology risk. There's a lot of work being done, this is on the equity side, in growth investments, so small scale demonstration, this kind of stuff. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where there's almost unlimited capital available for operating renewables, right? Because they're very, very low risk, lots of sovereign capital coming in, insurance capital coming in, et cetera. All of that's great, and we all know that we actually need more of that. But in the middle, for these scaled decarbonization solutions, we see a real lack of capital available. And what that means is you can have a great tax credit regime, you can have, hopefully, more proven commercial solutions, but there's not a capital available at the right price. And so I think that's where we need to start as we look at investing in this space.
And where do you think that capital could come from, if it is to come at all?
Well, I have at least one idea, but we'll save that kind of self-promotion for later.
So
but I think there is a lot of interest because there's something interesting about this need, which is that because they're hard assets, right? You need facilities to produce green electrons, green molecules, green widgets, green bytes in the data space. Because you have those hard assets, because they're at scale, you naturally have off-takers who are larger companies, sometimes governments, with reasonable credit. And so what you need to do is basically create structures that you can apply project finance to, which doesn't exist today for carbon capture. And then step into that with a sort of like, for us, I'm with our infrastructure business, with an infra-like mentality where you're buying down the cost of capital.
So one of the things that when I talk to financiers, big banks who are going to get into project finance, they point to the fact that, look, carbon capture technology is, as I said, many things, because it could be applied to many different sources of CO2. So the very capture part is many things. But then the capturing is not enough, right? You have to then actually sink it down. So it's carbon capture and storage.
And transport.
And so to get to the point of storage, you have to have transport. So typically you have at least 3 components that need to work in tandem.
That's right.
And there is now a tax credit, a big one. I mean, that even under Trump, one of the things about the US is that even though it has no agreement on science on both sides of the party, there is agreement on carbon capture technology on both sides of the party. Under Trump, there was a bill passed that increased the 45Q tax credit to $50, and now it's to $85. But during that period, and now, those 3 steps still require regulatory permission. So building of it, not so much. Transport, state local rules. Sinking, wells that need to have federal approval for. So those have been, at least from a financier's perspective, the things that have been the bottleneck, which is they feel like, okay, the technology might work, but the project is still risky because these other steps are not yet sorted.
Right, and you have project developers at different parts of the value chain, because in the United States, you don't just have one national oil and gas company. You've got upstream, midstream, downstream, different companies, and as well as a whole range of different industries that supply the CO2. And so there are a number of companies that are interested in developing geologic storage projects, but they need to have some confidence that there'll be a CO2 supply. And the other way around, if you want to finance a carbon capture facility at your chemical plant or power plant or whatever it is, you need to have some confidence that the geologic storage will be available. So 2 things, one policy, one regulatory. We are in a much better place now than we were in the first wave that you had on your slide, because one, we have a functioning tax credit and it is truly robust, and it was actually designed with investors in mind as opposed to some of the earlier tax credits. We also now have a $5 billion commitment in our infrastructure legislation that's dedicated to standing up a financing facility in the federal government for CO2 transport, which will leverage federal dollars, or private dollars many times over. And then we are specifically co-investing region by region in the development of geologic storage sites, even as we're incentivizing the capture through the 45Q tax credit. So a project developer that is interested in integrating all parts of the value chain with project partners will be able to have funding for the CO2 transport and storage side and financing, and can seek the tax credit, and in some cases go for demonstration dollars on the carbon capture. That's the policy side.
Yeah.
We have, the response to that has been, there's nearly 200 carbon capture projects that have been publicly announced. There's 160 some applications at the federal level for geologic storage permits. So there's been an enormous groundswell of interest in project development. The greater challenge is actually not policy now, in my view, but financial and regulatory certainty with respect, can you get your permits? So the 160 some what we call Class 6 geologic storage permits.
These are just basically wells that have to be checked by the Environmental Protection Agency, that those are places where you can actually sink the CO2 and it'll stay there and that'll be monitored and verified.
In over a 10-year period, there was an agreed process to develop that regulation and that approach with our Environmental Protection Agency and industry and other stakeholders. So it's now in place.
But how many of the Class 6 wells have been approved in those 10 years?
Just a handful. And we have 160 some pending.
My last count was 2. Has that increased?
Well, okay, so there's some that are in the final stage of comments, but yes, I mean, as far as actually final permits, it would be 2, 3, I can't remember exactly. Now, in the United States, which is different from some countries, federal agencies can delegate to states, if states meet federal standards, the ability to permit. So there are 2 states, my own state of North Dakota and Wyoming, that are doing their own Class 6 geologic storage permits, and North Dakota already has approved permits, so it's more nationally than that. But it's going to be a challenge, and the point I would make is just as we need to have scale technology to meet a climate challenge, we need to scale permitting to meet a climate challenge. The final thing I'd add to this, though, is our incentive and funding framework is so robust that another major constraint is local support. We are seeing, as you do around the world, growing opposition to projects and infrastructure. And it's not just projects that are like carbon capture, it's things like wind, solar, electric transmission, it's across the board.
Not in my backyard NIMBYs.
Well, yes, but it's across the political spectrum. It includes, community activists in the Gulf Coast that are approaching it from an environmental standpoint. In my own region of the Northern Plains, the North Dakota, South Dakota, that region, you have very conservative farmers and ranchers that are opposing CO2 pipelines and wind farms. And so we're having to change how we work as a federal department, as government, and how we engage with communities and stakeholders, because we won't meet our deployment goals and thus our climate goals unless communities welcome these projects.
One place we should look at just outside of the US where we know we have seen scaling up of clean technology done with clear incentive structure and then a lot of success, which is China. And they've done that for wind, solar, batteries, electric cars, now trying to do it with hydrogen. But the reason they've been able to do it is because there's that consistency. There is that view that we want to invest in this technology, but also that they can eventually make money from it. When I first started looking at carbon capture, this was back in 2017 when we talked, China was interested in the technology, but it's not really done much. So Neil, one question for you, because you don't invest just in the US, you have a global view, and you invest in infrastructure of all kinds, not just carbon capture. So what is it that you have learned from your global investing hat on when you're investing in clean energy technologies, carbon capture being one of them? What works and what would you seek apart from the project finance gap that is there to ensure that there will be more investment going into this technology?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we're a global investor, and I invest in a number of countries around the world, across most of the well, actually all of the continents to some respect. You had asked, for some of the investments we were doing, and so in the carbon capture space, as an example, we're invested in a company called Contour Global, which is, as the name implies, a global power generation company that's been doing carbon capture for over a decade. It's small scale, but in parts of Europe, including Eastern Europe and in Africa, we're doing carbon capture inside the fence of bottlers. So the technology, it's called a quad-gen technology, and it is improving efficiency of just the power generation by a third, but it's also capturing 95% of carbon dioxide emissions and then making them food quality,
fizzy drinks,
and then goes back into the drinks, right? Now, I'm not going to say that something like that is going to solve the global climate change need, but the reality is that, like, yes, they're big projects like Petronova get all the attention, but this is happening today. It's real, and that's purely commercial, right? And so I think that as a traditional infrastructure investor, you sort of start with what is commercially viable today. But I think we also have to live with the reality that in the climate space, this is a policy-driven transition. Right? Yes, we all know that commercial solar is competitive today with certain conditions, but you still need in the U.S. a renewable energy standard. Or in some cases, you need a production or investment tax credit. Similar schemes in every country. You mentioned China. Same in Europe. Europe
has a carbon
price. Yes, exactly. It will soon have
and it's a pretty healthy one, right? 90 euros a ton, $100 a ton.
And so I think for investors in this space, you have to get used to something very uncomfortable, which is being able to navigate these policy frameworks that for most of us, you sort of would have preferred to kind of avoid for the most part before. Like I don't, by nature, I don't want a grant from the Department of Energy.
The applications are complex.
And they're complex, and then you have, the government, basically sitting on your board. Do you really want that kind of stuff? Like, it's awkward, right? But we also have to deal with the reality that, like, we've mostly talked about the United States now, but there is carbon capture projects, of course, happening. You mentioned Australia, Norway is doing a lot, the UK, Brazil, et cetera. But the US is where the action is right now, and it's really because of the IRA and the government incentives pushing you there.
One other thing that we'll need to do is not just deal with the challenges that are there to invest in the US in that technology, but also then take it to other countries. Mm-hmm. And we've done that without a plan in the past. Take solar, for example. The panel was invented in the US in the 1950s, was really scaled up in Germany and Europe when they brought in huge incentive to try and deploy the technology. But then China found a cheaper way to make it, and so now it's there. But this happened without any coordination. Is there any attempt being made to figure out what the US government has as an understanding of scaling this technology, or technologists or investors have, to then take it to other countries where there may not be a carbon capture plant, or where there is one but you want more?
Yes, and I want Neil to speak to the investment part of it, because that's not my area. But in April, President Biden announced the Carbon Management Challenge at the Major Economies Forum, and we have been working ever since to recruit countries. There'll be a COP presidency event on Tuesday that will convene, I actually don't know yet how many countries, but a lot. There are 18 countries that have joined now, and what's interesting about it, it includes countries that have no fossil fuels and fully decarbonized power sectors like Iceland and Sweden. It includes the largest oil and gas producers in the world, the United States, UAE, Saudi, Canada, Norway, et cetera. It includes developing countries like Mozambique, Colombia, Egypt, Malaysia. It's an incredible diversity of countries, and one of our top priorities in this work to start is to have a finance work stream to take this whole multilateral discussion around finance and bring more focus on carbon management, because it doesn't get the attention that some of the other essential climate pathways do. Also, there's a number of enabling things that don't cost a lot of money but are essential to attract investment. Countries have to have a credible and certain regulatory framework. You also have to characterize reservoirs for storage, and if they aren't oil and gas fields, chances are they've never been characterized because there was no business motivation to do it. So countries have to identify the very best reservoirs for geologic formations for storage. So we are actively supporting countries already, but through this carbon management challenge, we really want to ratchet that up. And hopefully with some of these enabling pieces in place, it also makes it easier for private capital flow. The other thing that we want to work on is in some parts of the world, especially Southeast Asia as an example, maybe most prominently, some countries are going to be storage locations, storage hubs for other countries. Japan wants to export CO2 to places in Southeast Asia, offshore geologic storage hubs, and import energy from those countries. And these Southeast Asian countries are excited about that opportunity. But then you need to be able to have carbon credits and finance work and regulation work across international jurisdictions, and that has not yet been developed in the world today.
So we're coming to the end of the session. I wanted to bring this back to the start, which is we're going to talk about the phasing out of unabated fossil fuels. We don't know if all the countries sign off. We know that there are more than 100 countries now wanting that to be in the final agreement. If it does come through from an investor standpoint, how much does the final communique that's been agreed upon by 200 countries matter, right? We know tripling renewable energy likely will get through, but that is kind of doable right now. Bloomberg NEF estimates say we would have reached 9.4 terawatts anyway. We need to reach 11 terawatts for that tripling. So there's a gap, but it's not huge.
Yep.
For carbon capture, we're talking 30 times the gap. Will the use of phasing out of unabated fossil fuels, will that give you confidence that this technology is something governments will invest in, there'll be regulatory policies, and then you will find more projects to invest in?
Yeah, I mean, maybe a couple of thoughts on them. And one is, many years ago, over I guess 13 years ago, I used to work in the US government, actually worked in foreign relations, and I understand the value of communiques and this sort of stuff, but you don't make an investment based off a communique, right? You make an investment based off of a commercial case, right? And I think we have to be realistic that for large-scale carbon capture, the commercial case is still struggling to be shown. That doesn't mean it doesn't have great potential. It also doesn't mean it's ever going to be the only solution. But in some cases, there's still a variety of technologies. There's still technology to be de-risked in some aspects of it. We haven't talked about direct air capture, for example. Still needs to be proven. There's the very basic issue of you need to have that carbon you're capturing and either utilizing or sequestering needs to have some value put to it, right? And so this, it can be through a subsidy. It can be through a carbon price, like we talked about in Europe, the ETS. It could be a regulation, like the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which is going to figure into pricing for carbon capture. Ideally, the CO2 itself has a value as a feedstock. That's the Contour Global example that I used.
Are there mandates, like in the case of Chevron in Australia?
Or that as another real example, that sequestration is also adding value to your product. And so we're also an investor in Sempra Infrastructure Partners, which is actively developing a sequestration project at the Cameron LNG facility. That's going to sequester 2 million tons a year in saline aquifers. Their earlier stage on the Port Arthur facility, 38,000 acres of porous rock available for that project. I say those because they're real examples. They're real capital being put into it. And that will then create greener LNG. And I know that that's an oxymoron for some people. I get it. But we know that there's a future for LNG, so it better be greener, right? So you're adding value to your product. And so there are all of these pieces that have to make it available. I mean, there has to be an ecosystem around, right? The industrial sector is the place that you're going to have most of the carbon sequestration. You have to have the infrastructure. And I think the final thing I would say on it is that it has to be real, right? The emissions that you're capturing, sequestering, utilizing, they have to be relevant. Yep. They have to be credible. They have to be significant. And we have to have, and that credible piece, I think, is really important for us as investors. You have to have third-party validation that it's happening and that those are durable solutions.
Yep.
Because no one should be marking their own homework.
Well, this has been fun. We can keep talking for a long time. Unabated fossil fuels may get signed off, and we might be coming back here and talking about not tripling of carbon capture, but 30 times the carbon capture over the next decade. So
we have to be talking about that soon.
Thank you.
I hope we are. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage John Moore, CEO of Bloomberg NEF.
Hi, good morning. I think it's still morning. It's about midday, so we're a little bit in between. It's great to be here. It's great to be here in the warmth and the sunshine, actually. I spoke to my mum yesterday. She's in the northwest of the UK. It's white, it's snowy, it's freezing cold. And but at the middle of this year, in the northwest of the UK, which is renowned for being cold and wet, it was above 40 degrees C. So this is a place where AC is just not a thing. Nobody has air conditioning. Everybody has central heating because it's freezing cold. But it's above 40 degrees C. So that was my own sort of personal wake-up call that it really is time to get moving on climate. And that's backed up by the statistics. So this is 80 years of September's temperatures. And you can see baselined against the last 30 years, an average of the last 30 years. And you can see since 1990, really just how that's upticking. And we really are getting into, this year really is going to be extreme. It's going to be record land and sea temperatures. There's been wildfires in Canada affecting air quality in New York. So it really is about time we kept moving. And the good news is that there is a lot of commitment, at least at the highest level. So this is how much emissions is covered by some form of commitment. If you look on the left, you'll see January, sort of 2.5, 3 years ago. Red means nothing's happening, so 45%. So 55% have some form of commitment or under discussion about net zero. Roll the clock forward 2.5 years, and you're now at 92%. So only 8% of emissions are not covered by some form of commitment or under discussion. So that's the good news. But then the question is, actually, how do we do this? And this is complex system change, so we spend a lot of time in the details. You've heard a lot about that today, but it's really how do we take a step back, because we need to move together, so we really need to understand this. So really, this is a sort of 5-point plan. So step one, create a vision. We're actually now at a point where we can do that. So net zero mid-century really helped us. It put a stake in the ground so we could all model and get our heads around it. And then what this chart shows you is there's about 14 different industries that need to decarbonize. So that's the most important 14 industries. On top of this is agriculture and land use. So we haven't modeled that yet, but that will be on top. But there's 14 different industries. And what you'll see there is the dotted line shows us where economics alone, so we call this our economic transition scenario, because clean technologies are just getting cheaper. So actually, we will be reducing if we just make economically sensible choices, but we'll be at 2.6 degrees C. If we actually want to bend that curve down to be Paris compliant, and that's where the 1.77 is, then we need to invest over and above that, and that's where you see that glide path down. So we know statistically by sector how to decarbonize. You can then break that down by region. So in Europe, this is Europe's curve, so already more of a downward trend. Less economic growth in Europe, to be fair. This is what it looks like if you do it for India. So India's growing so rapidly that even economics will see a rise. So bending the curve is actually much, much harder. What you'll also see is a difference in the size of the industry sectors. So here you'll see power is a huge piece, the blue at the top, and you'll see the growth in the industrial sector happening in the 2030s, 2040s. So we know what we're trying to do. We also actually know what a lot of the technologies are. So again, this is just a global chart, but what it shows you is of the emissions reductions, 51%, so half of it is clean power. So if we nail clean power, that's 50% of the task. There's 23% is electrification, so that's electric vehicles, heating and cooling, etc. So that's another quarter. Then you get into the industrial side of it, so hydrogen, bioenergy, CCS, between 5 and 10%, and then some level of recycling. In our modeling, we put a little bit of carbon removals that we just had to have. But again, this varies by country, but it's not so dramatically different. So we know what the technologies are. On the power side, it's going to be dominated by renewables. Again, whether you just do it rationally with economics or whether you really want to bend the curve, renewables is going to be a big piece of the pie. And then you can also look by sector. So as well as geography, you need to also look by sector. So again, you can see a transition for road and rail that's going to be electrified. So the blue there is electricity. For aviation and shipping, you'll see it's sort of hydrogen and bioenergy. So those are the two dimensions to think about. So that's the vision, and we often underinvest in time in really understanding how the real economy needs to change. Point 2 then is about defining a plan. So we really need a plan. If we know where we're heading, then we need a plan. And we break this plan down into 4 pillars. Pillar 1, if you look on the left there, is accelerating what already works today. So again, there's a lot of talk about let's accelerate, but actually there are some things are mature and it's now pour in the money, the technology risk is low, the supply chains are there, they can scale. Pillar 2 is actually about the things that are really being proven. So things like hydrogen, CCS for a lot of other industries, not enhanced oil recovery, is unproven. So these are really early stage. We need proof of concept, and then we need to start scaling, do a few more of those projects before we really get into scaling. 3 is transitioning off current coal and energy carbon-intensive industries, and 4 is then a framework around it, an administrative framework, policies around it. So we need to do all of those 4 things at the same time. So pillar 1 are these kinds of technologies. So I'm sure you've seen all these charts before. The cost of wind, solar, lithium-ion batteries, plummeting. So they really are, the cheapest form of power. And these are the things that we really should be accelerating massively. And I know that's one of the discussions at COP, which is great to see. And this, again, economics or net zero, we should be scaling these massively. So this just makes economic sense to really scale, particularly this decade is going to make the most difference. So that's an example of pillar 1. Example of pillar 2 would be hydrogen. So this is the economics of green hydrogen. So that's the green curve you'll see. And what you'll see is actually it's about the 2030s that this becomes cost competitive with blue hydrogen. So that's hydrogen with CCS. And so this stuff needs to be piloted. We need to bring the cost down, but it's not ready to scale out economically. So that's why we call it phase 2 type technologies. If you look, just one example, different industries will then have a share of green gas. So this is just saying where hydrogen could be used. So a lot in shipping and steel, and where electrification. So buildings and roads, and that's all your EVs is going to be electrification. So again, so you start to be able to break out where those different technologies can be used. So that's the plan. The other third piece is around stakeholders. Those are 4 different stakeholder groups we believe really need to be engaged to get the transition moving. We've talked a little bit about industry sectors already, but we absolutely need government involved. We really need government. We need finance of all flavors, and we also need civil society. We really need to bring people along with us. In many places they vote for the governments anyway, so it's a sort of circular connection. In terms of government, a good example of this is the Inflation Reduction Act. So the US really did pass a monster act last year, August of last year. That's the $369 billion, but it was on top of an infrastructure act that was already $80 billion, and which already touched on a lot of energy infrastructure. So you see, huge investment across actually a wide range of technologies in the ecosystem. And you can see we had to redo our numbers, we had to redo our predictions. The solid line is before the IRA, the dotted line is afterwards. And you can see, 10, 15 gigawatts a year that's been uplifted pretty quickly. So, by 2023, 24, 25, you're already seeing significant uptick. And a lot of the focus was about manufacturing. And this is how much went into manufacturing in the first year. This number is now over 100 billion. And about 3/4 of it has gone into battery manufacturing. But you can see how from August 22, when it started, just how much has been invested into manufacturing in the US. So that's governments and what governments can do. And then there's finance, just to show a little bit on the finance side. These organizations produce scenarios and forecasts. You can see that's the small text here. These are the different forecasts that these different organizations produce. You can actually work out how much money is needed to implement, and each one of these blocks represents a scenario from either IEA or NGFS or IPCC. And so you can see the blocks represent how many trillions per decade. The numbers in the blocks, so what's that run rate? What's that annual investment? So you can really start to turn that into numbers, and what that tells you is what ratio of clean to fossil fuels is needed to really hit those plans. If you take an average, which is where the middle of that dotted line is, to date it's been less than 1 to 1, so less than $1 clean dollar for every fossil fuel dollar that's gone in. And we need to get to 4 to 1, 4 clean for every 1 fossil. And the good news about ratios is it doesn't matter how big or small your financial institution is, you can apply the ratio to your business and work out how you score on this. And it needs to be 6 to 1 and then 10 to 1 in the subsequent decade. So again, governments need to lean in, but financial institutions also need to lean in. And finally, we got to bring people with us. So we don't do much research on civil society, but we all know that this, we have to bring people with us. We're also part of this as well. We have to pay our energy bills, we have to buy our new vehicles or whatever. So we have to have something that works for civil society too. And then the fourth piece of it is about raising finances. So, we're going to need to invest more. And if you run the numbers, so our ETS, so if we just invest in the cheapest clean technology, then it's already $120 trillion is going to be invested between now and mid-century in these technologies. That's the chart on the left. What's interesting is blue is demand side and green and gray is supply side. What's interesting is just how big EVs is a piece of this jigsaw. And also how grids appear again to be a very significant piece of the jigsaw. And on the right is net zero, so that's the 200 trillion. What you'll see is whichever way you go, it's about 50-50 supply demand. And actually, despite everything that's going on in the world, there's a lot going on in the world right now. There's increasing investment. So we're now at $1.1 trillion into these clean technologies, up 31% last year. So again, increasing. About 50-50 supply demand, and you can see there the yellow is renewables, the green is electrified transport. Money's starting to flow into these sectors. But if you look at where that money is flowing, so you can just segment that by geography, 50% of 1.1 trillion is in China. So there really is one country that's investing massively in these clean technologies. The US is about 13% of that number. Germany's next, and they invest 1/10 of what China is investing. And if you take the 1.1 trillion on the left there, so that's the chart you just saw, there is also another 470 billion going into other related areas. So the grid is getting some investment, 274 billion, also some others on supply chain manufacturing and corporate finance, IPOs, etc. But is that enough? So if you add the 1.1 to the grid, that's where you get the 1384 there. The chart on the left shows you where we are today. The bar next to it is where we need to be. So we need a threefold, a 3x increase now in the financial flows into these technologies to get on track. It's then going to be 7 and then 8 billion in terms of 8 trillion in terms of an annual run rate that we need to get to. So you can see how much that really needs to increase. So that's point 4. Point 5 is this, actually. So we had a Vice President Gore come speak to our team, 300 people in London in the summer, and we sort of asked him, we said, how do you keep focused on this? How do you keep everybody on message? How do you keep everybody's spirits up as they work away at something that's actually very hard and is difficult to make progress? His advice to everybody was get moving, and I think that's very, very appropriate. So that really is our 5-point plan. Think about a vision, think about sectors and geographies, define a plan, think about phasing, because not everything is ready to scale now. Make sure you engage all 4 stakeholders, because there are so many discussions that take place that have 2 of the 4. And it's pretty obvious where the missing link is, and we're never going to get there unless we really engage those 4 stakeholder groups. Raise money. This is not just for finance. This is government money. This is corporate investment. This is consumers paying more for something that's clean. And then, last but not least, get moving. All of us. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Her Royal Highness Princess Lamia Bint Majed Saud AlSaud, Secretary General and member of the Board of Trustees at Al Walid Philanthropies, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Francine Lacroix.
Hi, everyone. Your Royal Highness, thank you for joining us. You are a do-gooder. You try and advance, you push boundaries to make the world a little bit more equitable, a little bit fairer, and a little bit greener. Talk to us now about what initiatives you're putting in place that work, because a lot of the initiatives take a longer time. So what are you focusing on right now?
First of all, thank you very much for having me here, and I'm really grateful for such an opportunity. Well, talking about one initiative will be very hard, but let's talk about one area of focus. So our foundation is working in 180 countries around the world. We work in 5 areas of focus, which is community development, goes under health, education, infrastructure, empowering women and youth, and we lean heavily toward the creative economical empowerment. We work in providing vital disaster relief in time of crisis. We work in bridging gap between Islam and West and promoting for acceptance, tolerance, and understanding. And we work in promoting healthier environment. But from our talk, briefly, a while ago, I think empowering women would be very interesting for you. So in empowering women, as I said before, I think we need to pay a respect for each and every community and understand the need and what's suitable for each and every community to develop people's life and to upgrade their skills or reskill them. You need to take your time and survey. You need to have the proper data, and you need to understand more how to benefit those communities and families. Yet, also, moreover, I would say, you need to have your time being in this country. A hit-and-run situation, it's not suitable for a philanthropic act whatsoever. If you want to have an effect on people's life, you need to stay with them minimum of 5 years, just to evaluate and to move forward.
But Princess Lamia, when you look at climate change, I mean, this is probably one of the biggest challenge, if not the biggest challenge of our lifetime. How do you integrate that into everything that you do? Because it's always actually the women and children that suffer the most, even in climate change.
Absolutely. I believe the woman or the mother, I would call for the mother now. When you raise your kid to understand more about the problems happening around the world, slowly but surely, I doubt, honestly, and we were just talking about it, when I actually attended some of the events in COP, whether this one or the one in Egypt. And surprisingly, I didn't meet a lot of youth. It's our age and above. And I don't think this is what's needed to solve this problem, honestly. I believe we need to trust more. We need to give them a clear path for them to achieve and to be beside us, Maybe you can transfer knowledge. Well, I believe, let's be very honest, when we work in places like Africa and a lot of places with the underprivileged family, let's not kid ourselves. Do you think they understand what does it mean, a green job or a green environment? Or no, they don't. They do it because they see a benefit out of it, and they see a better income, a sustainable type of life. But their kids will always follow them in what they're doing. So they will create this mindset as the green jobs or the green buildings, or it's not only on a governmental level that you can help this cause, it's also on an individual level. So I believe I would give the responsibility. What's needed now, it's trust, give the responsibility, give them their KPIs, tell them that at 2030 you need to deliver this in this way, and this is your tools.
And you also use a lot of data to understand, first of all, where it has the most impact, so what benefits when you give money, but also what issues you need to tackle.
Listen, for any, I would say, not only in philanthropy, even in business, to be successful, you need to have your data to assess, to understand where you are and how to move and where to move and when. The 4 W's and H must be answered in any and every equation that you want to be, that you want to solve. For us, data is a key, especially with a foundation that literally works in everything, and with a foundation that wants to make a difference, but in a different way. And it's not only data that really helps, as well of understanding the language of whether the youth, the community, the tradition. You have to respect their tradition, their beliefs, and to work parallel to it, not against it. In philanthropy, there is a successful project. There is no such a thing called one size fits all. You need to respect and you need to understand what they need, and if you can provide it or not, with their way, not yours.
Princess Lamia, when you look at the role of philanthropy, what do you think it is longer term? So is it to give a helping hand to a community that then can sustain itself and you focus on something else? Like, how do you view the timelines of where you decide to invest and focus on?
So, as I said, our 5 areas of focus, but our I would say, how we do our equation, just to ensure the sustainability of the project moving forward. So we have this formula. It's us, it's government, it's international entity, and on-ground partners, NGOs or MPOs. This is a key, because you need to make sure that the project is well delivered upon the need of the country, and you need, after you finish, and as I said, minimum is 3. Some of the project we stay for 10 years with them, just to ensure they're really evolving. So after you get out and after you finish your funding, you need to make sure that you have the buy-in for the government, so they move on and they keep it sustainable, because this is one of the main criteria for our projects.
Can you talk to us maybe about something, a personal project that was close to your heart, where you've seen real success, so that other philanthropists also in the room can take away some of the key findings and how they can go and do good?
So I'll give you 2 projects, one on the local level, the domestic level, Saudi level, and I'll give you one on the international level. The Saudi level, in 2014, it wasn't that open and it wasn't that welcome to talk about legal women's rights in Saudi Arabia. So we had this project to create awareness about women's legal rights. And it was literally a kind of impossible to have the freedom to talk to women and, to educate them, tell them on the constitution they have rights and everything. And it was really a very tough thing to do. But we kept it going. It's not only we kept it going, and it started evaluating. We start training lawyers, female lawyers, to practice. Now we have 800 lawyers. It started evolving. Now we train on human rights laws. We have 600 of them are very well trained on human rights laws. Now they're working with the national security, and now it's a kind of a governmental project, because now they're trained on the information law, or the privacy of information. So this is one project in Saudi Arabia. The very much project that I'm extremely proud of is the Nubian Vault. Nubian Vault is a project that we work on in Sub-Saharan Africa. They're using natural resources to build, it's a green building, and it's a green jobs core. We're training masons. Till now, I think we finalized over 7,000 units, houses, and we trained over 600 masons. So I'm very proud of them, honestly. And by the way, Nubian Vault, we have been supporting them for 10 years now.
And how do you work with governments? Again, if a government says, no, or I'm not interested, and I hear this from a lot of philanthropists, they say, you're always going to face obstacles. It's how you face those obstacles and try and work around it. Is there a secret sauce in trying to...
It's always agreed from the beginning.
So that
always agreed from the don't have the buy-in after. No, it's always
make sure you
and we have a very good, putting in mind that our chairman is one of the biggest businessmen in the world. So I believe this is help because there is, you know, a mutual benefit. Not in each and every situation, but I would say it helps a lot. Yeah. It helps a lot get us in.
How would you accelerate the mitigation of climate change right now? When you look at COP, I guess we've seen some achievements, but we could go a lot further. How do you see it through the lens of the community that you try and serve?
I would say it differs from a community to another. I believe, as we talked, I think we have a lot of lost opportunities that we can deliver messages more clear and more accurate. I believe we need to empower this generation. I believe we need to clarify that you can have an individual action, and it will also be counted as an action to help your planet. We need to create an awareness about it's not only the big boys and the big players have to go into this game and conquer. No, each one of us can have the role, but we go back to talking their language, to understand, to respect their mentality, and to deliver the message their way, not ours.
Which is how a lot of times when you speak to, mothers or youth, you have to have cleaner air to breathe in instead of maybe talking about say it too complicated. Does climate change have a PR problem?
Yes.
In getting to the...
It does. It does heavily. Okay, I'll tell you our humble experience. So we've been suffering or struggling, I would say, to reach a certain type of generation, putting in mind that we are a nation, 67% is under 28 in Saudi Arabia. So we have a segment in the community that is very big, and I don't think we are communicating with them in the right way. So we tried something in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. So we upon research and data, we understood that this generation are living life virtually. They're not here with us. They don't communicate as we do. So in the International Tolerance Day, we thought of let's do something their way. So we launched our Metaverse Center. And we display all our research center. We're very much lucky to have the opportunity to build from scratch the Islamic Art Center in the Louvre Museum, and in renovating and building from scratch a big part of the Islamic Art Center in the Berlin Pergamon Museum. And we're affiliating with the Oxford Museum. So we actually did it. We put some of the objects online. We created our center, and we did a hidden object game in the... Okay, you know how many hits, online hits came? 2.5 billion hits. Wow. In 1 week, and I was like, what's going on? So we duplicated this, and we launched something called the first Metaforest lately. We just launched it with the Scouts Foundation, which is a very interesting partner that can help a lot in the climate. And we are working with them on the SDG project in Africa and in the Middle East. So now we had this initiative, which is the first metaforest. We had almost 40,000 unique visitor. We had almost 12,000 planted trees. And I'm not sure of the visitor, not the unique, the amount of the visitor, but we witnessed and we experienced the success, and we start getting people connecting us online. They have ideas how to give more an interesting topic that's relevant to climate or to the SDGs. So this is what I'm saying. You need to go via their channels, not yours.
And not many people are doing that.
Yes, because we're stubborn. People are stubborn. So you need to be less stubborn. You need to trust them, have them on your side. Just give them deliverables, give them the tools, and they need to run with it. We cannot keep running with it because we will be old very soon. So yeah.
And Princess Lamia, when you look at the youth, is that through education? Like, what's the right, if you talk about deliverables and making sure that they have targets and that we listen to them, does that have to be through education or, a government body? Like, what's the right way for this to go forward?
It can be diverse, because literally climate problems, it's in each and every aspect of your life. It can be included. You can have, you have it embedded in certain messages, and you can have it as a clear headline. It differs upon, the goal of your initiative. So, for example, with the SCAS Foundation, it's everything. They do it on agriculture, in universities, in building, in social services. So it's more on the not embedded, but more on the active side of the story.
Yeah.
So it's activities more than sitting in a classroom and being taught what's 1, 2, 3. No, but yet you can have it with the with the smaller age. You can embed it or have it as a curriculum, but a small one. As they learn ABC, they can learn some of how to live their life in a certain way to keep this planet safe.
You seem very hopeful that the next generation will be better than us. What gives you that hope?
They bet. If not, then we were going to have a very big problem. No, I think they're excited about it, and I think it's a very cheerful aspect of the SDGs, because it's a lot of it's diversified. It's not one thing. Climate have a lot of aspects around it. So you have the agriculture, you have the recycling, you have the fuel, you have zillions of things that will lead to a better world to live in, them and their kids. So I do bet on them, because I can see how when best you open just a very small part of the door, they run. So this is a very good indication that they're interested, I hope.
Well, how will your foundation change over the next 4 to 5 years, or is it still the same 5, of course, focuses?
Actually, we were 4 areas of focus. We just introduced or integrate the 5th 2.5 years ago. So we are always evolving. That's if you want to do good, really, and you want to have a sustainable and effective footprint, because put in mind, this is a legacy foundation. It's an individual, that's his legacy. So we need to make sure that it will stay for more years to come.
Yeah, we're almost out of time, but actually I would like to, and I've met people here at COP who, again, have money, who want to start a foundation, but they don't really know what to focus on, because there's a lot of things. What would be your best piece of advice of someone who's trying to make a little bit of a difference even in this world?
This is not a job. Philanthropy is not a job. It's a passion. Whenever I recruit any of my team, the first question, if you're coming to a job, let's end it now. That's not a job. That's a passion. So whoever wants to spend his money in something, he needs to discover his passion first before putting his money.
Princess Lamia, thank you so much for joining us today.
That is the end of our morning block of programming. I would ask you to wait 1 second because I do have some instructions for you. We do have lunch just outside of here, so if you are hungry, please join us over there. And then if you pre-registered for either of our lunchtime sessions, which is Navigating Corporate Climate Action or Supercharging the Renewables Race, those will be in our breakout rooms, which are on the 7th floor. So just go upstairs and you take the elevators to 7, and then you'll be directed up there. We will be back. Those start at 12:45 too also. We'll be back here at 2 o'clock with White House Climate Advisor Ali Zaidi. So we'll see you back here then. Thank you so much.
Thank you.